We never talked about race growing up. I just don't think that was ever a conversation. I thought that love would conquer all and skin color really didn't matter. I had to learn the really hard way when they almost killed you. Yeah, I was 19 years old. I had picked up a friend, and I noticed that we had red and blue lights behind us. We were being pulled over. The officer explained I had made an illegal left turn and to step out of the car. So I get out of the car first. He pats me down, and then he goes around to the passenger side and pulls my friend Addison out of the car. Addison is white. Yeah, Addison is white. And he had some weed in his coat pocket. So he gets placed in handcuffs. I figure that everything's okay. I'm not in handcuffs. I've already been patted down. Plus, there's 3 officers on the scene. And I had never had a negative interaction with police in my life. So I asked them, can I please see a warrant before you continue the search? And they grabbed me and began to hit me in the face. I could hear Addison in the background yelling, stop, leave him alone. I was hit several times, and I remember gasping for air and spitting and blood flying across the grass. And then I hear an officer shout out, he's reaching for a gun. I immediately started yelling, no, I'm not. I'm not reaching for anything. And I remember an officer say, if he doesn't calm down, we're going to have to shoot him. I could feel the gun pressed to my head. I expected to be shot. And at that point, I lost consciousness. I woke up to a multitude of officers just standing around me laughing. One officer was like, where's that warrant now, you f***ing nigger? It took 45 stitches to close up the lacerations in my face alone. How did it feel when you finally saw me? All I remember is involuntarily screaming. That was the first time I had cried the entire time I had been in there. And it wasn't my injuries that hurt. It was just seeing how it devastated you. My whole worldview changed that night. Yeah. For me, it was the point of awakening to how the rest of the world is going to look at you. I was just another black face in the streets. And I was almost another dead black male.
Seeing the world, and yet again, another person, but this time it ended in a murder.
You know, when I first started getting into this line of work, I didn't really have a great understanding of the complexities and the vast nature, just how big and intersectional racism really is. And for me, I mean, and I hate to say it like this, but the way that we have been continuously torn down every time we gain momentum, whether it's through white militias or other forms of white supremacy, or just a blatant lack of acknowledgement to someone's personal narrative, unless it's caught on camera. And even when it's caught on camera, it's still scrutinized with 100% of the people who are looking at this have an inability to wrap their minds around real racism. They're looking at this as, this person is violent, they must have done something wrong, we cannot trust them, our law enforcement officers are here to protect them. And for many people in this country, that's just simply not the narrative. So for me, when I see something like that, it really just makes my heart hurt for my daughter, for his family, for his community. And it's a continuous reminder to people who have been in this type of suffrage that this is where the system believes your place in society is.
And how have you experienced, even after experiencing all this, has anything changed for you as far as the way that you feel you're treated?
I think the temperature around the country right now has become more accepting openly again to these types of violence, to these types of opinions, and the blatant betrayal and support for racist entities. I feel like there was a period of time where it felt like people were trying to suggest that racism was only an issue during slavery or during the times of segregation. And I asked myself, well, when did these times stop? You know, really what we are is a business. The United States functions under the logic of safety, where nothing succeeds like success. Change is financially risky, so you repackage and redistribute. My mom is from Americus, Georgia, and she grew up with segregated bathrooms, whites and blacks only. Same with swimming pools, same with grocery stores, you name it. And I grew up becoming initially a victim of the exact same type of violence the Black people on the other side of the community she lived in had to experience every day. So this really has just been repackaged and redistributed. And I think that now we are on the verge of a real social eruption. And the people who have been turning a blind eye to it are scared. And the people who have silently supported it or blatantly supported it, I feel, are more empowered, and they are not afraid to show it.
So when it comes to racism and you walking through your own journey, learning your own identity, and then this happening to you, can you tell me a little bit more about how you've been able to process that?
Yeah, coming from an adopted family where I didn't really have in-depth conversations about race, my sister and I were the diversity in our town, and we came from a small mountain community here in Colorado. And so for me growing up, there was always a search for identity taking place. There were always some sort of identity crises. You know, I was too dark to be white, but I wasn't. I obviously was the whitest Black kid in some circles. A lot of confusion because of stereotypes and expectations that my peers had on how Black people are supposed to behave. So as a young person, this obviously created confusion in my psyche. And don't get me wrong, my parents did things to the best of their ability, what they understood. Having Black figurines in the house, taking me to diverse parts of the city to engage with kids of different ethnic and racial and cultural backgrounds. But the true complexities of structural racism, they certainly did not understand. And so having to go through something like this, for me, was a point of awakening to where I had to understand what kind of man I wanted to become. And the most therapeutic and rational thing for me to do at that point was to get involved, because the moment you start becoming comfortable with injustice, I think the moment you have sacrificed your own self-identity.
So far. When it comes to your personal identity and, like I said, maneuvering through the world and everything that's happening coming to foresight, what are some things that you feel like can be done to bring more awareness? And the other question is, from this experience that you have had, do you have flashbacks? What are some of the negative impacts that it's really affected you? Just being able to, once again, be now a person that is a leader in your communities and other communities, and being able to maneuver all the different things that you do on your day-to-day process. Can you tell me a little bit more about that kind of combination?
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of what I experienced in the beginning was so difficult to process, I had to just start writing it out. And that's really where my initial form of self-therapy came from, was writing music, poetry, my own personal narrative, what happened. And then I submitted a paper in one of my English classes about what happened. And this was while I was still going through the criminal proceedings. They falsely charged me with criminal intent to disarm a police officer as an effort to justify their actions. So right now, I'm also struggling with these identity crises. I'm thinking, wow, I'm a Black man who just conformed to the national expectation of Black men. I am on my way to prison. And I can sit here comfortably 31 years old and say, I'm proud to be a Black man who's never been to prison. And unfortunately, not too many of us now can say these things. But then I started talking about my experience, and this was really just so I could digest and process what initially happened to me. Being called a nigger, being brutalized almost to death with a flashlight and a radio, and then demanding photos be taken before I'm treated. I'm going into shock. I'm debating whether or not I'm going to die before I get to the hospital. That still was unclear. And then to have to go immediately back to school when I got out of jail. I went my first day, spring semester, first year of college, with 45 stitches in my face, you know. And now, looking back at it, I think there's been a point of graduation from being a victim to becoming a survivor, and then in what appropriate ways I can help other people in the community heal from these types of violence. And it's such a complex system. Most people don't really know how to attack it, where the pressure points are, and that's intentional. I mean, I've been in this work almost 11 and a half years, and I still see new things every day. And it's taken me a long time to even understand where we can apply pressure to begin to fight back in other ways besides protesting in the streets. And I'm an advocate for protesting in the streets. I've been doing it a lot for many years of my life. But I think we have a whole toolbox, and we have, while we're protesting, we can be also doing these other things as well. And so that's kind of where I'm at now, is showing whatever support I can for people who are unfortunately in the beginning stages of their own personal journey through this type of violence.
How do you feel social media has played an impact in either the furthering of social injustices or the healing?
You know, I think it's done a couple things, and another thing I think I'd like to add in there is the desensitization of these types of violence. Yes, it's been, you can't sit here and deny these things anymore, where you've got officers shooting an unarmed Black man who is running away from him several times in the back, and then nonchalantly dropping the taser at his feet, at his dead body. Obviously, and this is the Walter Scott case, and this is how comfortable this officer was with not only taking a life, but then trying to cover it up. And if that video didn't surface, that would have been exactly what would have happened. Had I died on the way to the hospital, all the community would have known, since there wasn't a video, is that this kid tried to disarm this Black man, a nigger, as the Denver District 6 police officers called me, tried to take my gun away and killed him. And that would have been that. And I think having video cameras have really proven to community members who for some reason are meeting these narratives with skepticism that this is not bullshit, this isn't a fantasy, this isn't exaggerated, it's actually much more serious than we're sitting here giving the credit for on the video. And that in and of itself is great. Unfortunately, why do we have to even be here? And so I also think that video footage has perpetuated the desensitization. It's also allowed people to get their narratives heard, but it also has the ability to do damage. I think it can do all three of these things, depending on the type of content you're producing, depending on the type of platforms you're sharing it on, and who your audience is, and what you're telling your audience to do, to how to think, what to engage in. It can be a recruitment tool for some very dangerous things on that same note. So I think anyone who is consuming media or producing media should consider it a responsibility to filter through bullshit or to utilize this as a real tool. And in the heat of the moment with the COVID-19 crisis happening around the world, what better time to really become clear on how you want to utilize such an important platform.
And in your experience of what happened to you, you mentioned that he did call you derogatory remarks.
Mm-hmm.
When that happened to you, what was the identity to what he was saying to you as you're going through this experience before you had the blackout from being hit repeatedly?
So as I was being beaten down, the officer who we later found out was Randy Murr, was the officer who said that I made an effort to disarm Officer Tiffany Middleton. We later found out that obviously when they got back to the station, they needed more evidence. So then they said there was a bloody handprint that never existed. And then Officer Middleton came forward and said, no, Mr. Laudaul never made an effort for my gun. So she went directly against corroborated stories with officers on the scene, someone who hadn't even been dispatched yet, around how the narrative was supposed to go. And unfortunately, her being the only woman on the scene, they needed an officer to be a scapegoat. So now we have this role of toxic masculinity on top of this structurally racist ordeal that's transpiring, and they wanted to use this woman officer as the scapegoat. So the thing that I think is important to realize is how comfortable these types of things are. The very first thing I remember amongst these officers, how comfortable these things are amongst these officers, business as usual. First thing I remember when I woke up was officers laughing, standing around me laughing about what had just happened. One officer said, you have no idea how close you were to getting your fucking head blown off. And the gun was pressed up to my head. The only reason he didn't shoot me, I believe, is because there were 11 cops on top of me. If you blast me in the side of the head and that bullet goes out of my, there's an exit wound, and you shoot one of your colleagues in the process, that is why I think they just tried to beat me to death, to be honest with you, because it was at that particular moment too dangerous to probably discharge firearm. But the gun was to my head. I passed out. I woke up to being rolled out of the gutter by my ankles and drugged backwards and left on an officer's jacket to bleed. And an officer said, you don't know how close you were to getting your fucking head blown off. And another officer said, where's that warrant now, you fucking nigger? And they were just standing around laughing about it. And when I was in the ambulance, they had handcuffed me to the stretcher. Actually, initially I refused treatment. I didn't have any insurance. The next thought that went through my head was to run my tongue over the back of my teeth, make sure my teeth hadn't been knocked out. They weren't. And then the thought I had after that was, I don't have insurance, and I'm telling this paramedic who's there to leave, to get out of here. I'm not going to the hospital. And I'm trying to rationalize this irrational situation. And the only thing that made sense was I need more time. I didn't know how bad my injuries were. I couldn't see out of my right eye. I knew I was covered in blood. I didn't know what I had been hit with, but I could feel the metallic reverberation of something heavy when they were striking me in the face. And I knew I probably did need medical attention. Had I not gone to the hospital, I'd be dead right now. And I know that because when they put me on the stretcher after I was handcuffed, they sent an accompanying officer with us to Denver Health. And the officer, they wanted to put an IV in my arm. And I told them, no, I'm cool. I don't want any needles. I don't want anything in me from you all at this point in time. And the officer said he can take a beating, but he's afraid of needles. What a pussy. And he started laughing about it on the way to the hospital. And meanwhile, they took my witness, my passenger, to coerce him into a false statement. They made him write it exactly how they wanted him to write it, or they told him, if you don't write it like this, we'll do the same thing to you and we'll send you to jail. And they're like, this nigger is not your friend. He would do the same thing to you. And he complied, and he later came back and recanted with an affidavit. But these officers were far too comfortable with their behavior. Like they had just done this a million times over. And the comfort comes from the impunity offered to them from the criminal justice system. That's how they get so good at this. They're not like an organized crime syndicate. No, it's just DAs refuse to indict officers on criminal charges. Seldom that happens. And unfortunately, cities got to get burned down or big chaos has to transpire before a DA is going to press charges. Had this eruption not occurred, I can't sit here with full confidence and say those officers would have been indicted in the George Floyd case. I don't think they would have been at all. And this is the reason why community members have been back. This is what happens when you back the community into a corner for so long. I mean, emotions erupt. And to people who just find this funny, like this is the difference. This is the difference in mentality. And they wonder why people are upset.
So when it comes to like, it's just so much, you know, like it's so intense because this is generational. This is broken families on top of broken families. There's just so much, and there's so many facets to this, and a lot of it's also a moral obligation to each other.
Absolutely.
And why is there such a divide in that moral obligation?
You know, you had said something about the power of media earlier, and I think to your earlier point, that plays a big role in the divide. You know, they understand the power of media. Cultural improficiencies have been strengthened based on scary images of people who look different than other people, you know, and as these things continue to happen, like the case of Jessica Hernandez, for example, these were 5 teenagers sleeping in a car in an alley, and this woman felt too scared to walk up and tap on the window to see if these kids were okay. You know, maybe something serious had just happened. And unfortunately, she called the police, and officers responded and fired multiple rounds into the car, killing this little girl. You know, and that's because she had, for some reason, been taught that this is too scary for her to deal with by herself. Let me get help. These are kids we're talking about. You know, my daughter is about to turn 6, and she understands that police are dangerous and that spontaneous movements could get you killed. You know, she was driving with her mom the other day, and they were talking about law enforcement and how it's not a joke if we get pulled over. And she said, "Don't worry, Mom, I already know to put my hands up." And I hate that my 5-year-old has to know that.
How did you get from the point from being in the hospital, being unconscious, just beaten up, in jail, to fighting for not only your life, and to bring light and to bring awareness to this subject that is very serious?
You know, and I didn't realize it at the time, but that very first moment I demanded pictures be taken prior to any treatment in the back of that ambulance, putting my life on the line right then and there, because not having treatment was what led me into shock shortly after that. You know, I had to be stabilized with the oxygen mask as I violently shook on the stretcher handcuffed at the ankles and the wrists, freezing cold body temperature because of the amount of blood I had just lost from my face. And that was the moment that I knew that this is something that I couldn't let go. And if I was going to die, it was going to happen right there on that stretcher. And then it was a little bit at a time, you know, okay, now I had this criminal case I have to beat, you know, and I didn't have any money. My case was dismissed a week before trial, and I did that with a public defender, you know, and this was a case that was about to send me to prison for 7 years, you know, had I blown that trial. And they had my photos, and those photos were some seriously damning pieces of evidence in conjunction with how sloppy they were in trying to cover their actions up. But so then the case was dismissed. And then there was a point in time where I was feeling discouraged. I remember I was at CCD at the time. I had talked to probably 4 different civil firms at the time. Nobody said I had a case. Big firms here in the city. And I was sitting on a bench at the campus one day, and my former professor, Yvonne Fry, the last thing she said to me before she was killed was not to give up on justice. I deserve enough money to come back and buy this campus. And she was killed actually later that week by a drunk driver. But so after she told me that, I went into the tech lab and just made a list of probably 33 different firms, some out of state even. Just called them up, crossed them off, called them up, crossed them off, met with them, called them up, crossed them off. And 33 firms later, I found where I was supposed to be. And Holland, Edwards, and Grossman came through with just a war hammer. And actually, you know, for one, I don't think a lot of these firms read the material. Because if you read the case, page for page, it was clear that the officers' stories didn't line up, and that the officers had lied their way through all kinds of documents. And that one of the officers who I was supposedly trying to disarm, came forward and said that never happened. So, and this is again part of the structural process. Civil rights attorneys out here make decisions on whose cases they will and won't take. and whose cases are easy, whose cases will be too difficult to address. And oftentimes, in my case in particular, they just took it for face value. Oh, young black kid tried to disarm a cop and got beat up. Well, I know you didn't read it, because had you read it, you'd see that all of the proofs in the pudding. And so I really commend them for taking the case, spending the time to actually fight for my civil rights. And once that ball got rolling, it was like, well, what can I do now? That settled out of court for, at the time, the 4th largest civil settlement in Denver's history. And I just felt an obligation at that point to my community. Those were the only people who were there. The media went to Channel 9 with stitches in my face. They didn't want to hear about it until the case was dismissed, or I had a civil rights case rolling. They didn't want to hear about how a young black man got beat up by Denver police, but he may have deserved it in their eyes. So we're not even gonna touch this. And the city didn't want to do anything. Manager of safety said the officers didn't do anything wrong. Weren't even fired for my case. In fact, within 6 months, 2 of the same officers involved in my case had gone on to hurt other people in 2 separate incidences that were both caught on camera. And this is the thing, when narratives aren't recognized for the power they hold, patterns and practices of abuse continue. And so now I just feel like it is a responsibility I have to myself as a black man, as a successful entrepreneur in the community, as a survivor and a healer of these types of violence, and as a father, to be involved in this line of work. And I pray for the day down the line that our younger generation won't have to do this. But as long as we can stand for justice, it's worth standing for.
I wanted to mention that in the link below, if you guys do not know your rights, you'll be able to know your rights, because it is very vital and very important that you do know your rights. And so when they are being violated, that you speak up, because so many cases happen and people do not speak up. Or, as you know, cases happen where people can't speak up anymore. Right. And that being said, you are involved heavily in many communities, and you do spread this message as a black male. So I also wanted to get the perspective of a female who also has endured social injustices due from unlawful and breaking of our amendments. So please welcome Ana Ortega. Thank you for having me. So I wanted to get, how are you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot, it's heavy.
Yeah, it's really heavy. So can you tell me a little bit of your experience with police brutality and feeling objectified and singled out in racism?
I think that Alex touched on a lot of really, really important topics, stemming from starting with, sorry.
No, there's so much, and you've experienced it yourself.
Yeah.
And so I'm also that when we are in, we're almost reliving it a little bit, right?
Yeah,
and it's like you have to bring your mind back to these places that can feel uncomfortable. So as a woman, do you feel like you have identified with being singled out as a woman, or because of your race? Well, tell me also a little bit of what happened to you.
Sure.
As well.
Sure, so I was assaulted by 2 officers, same district, District 6, and in Denver. I was part of the Denver Diner case where 4 women were assaulted by 2 male police officers. That was really one of the biggest things that I suffered through, was understanding that, or coming to terms with the fact that these officers, big officers, 6-foot-tall men, armed men, could so easily and so freely assault women, assault 4 women, unarmed women, women in skirts, women in heels. it's very difficult to kind of go back and relive that situation where, you know, you want to make sure that people around you are okay. I'm a nurturer 100% through and through, and I want to make sure that my people are always good. In the situation that happened, I was responding to the officer hitting someone who was really close to me. And my response was to take care of that person, you know, and step in front of that person and say, like, don't do this. This is absolutely wrong. So listening to Alex's story about how the officers left, the officers made those comments about his race. I was called bitch to my face, sitting in the car after I was maced, handcuffed and maced. I was placed in the back of a police car without medical attention, and, you know, face covered in pepper spray, face covered in main makeup, and face just completely burning. And with the windows rolled up, so the windows were cracked, and I just remember, like, trying with my hardest to open my eyes so that I could see badge numbers, so that I could see names of police officers, so that I could identify them in some way, because they were laughing, because it was a joke, because as a result of what happened, a little bit about my case is that the only way anyone believed me, going back to what Alex was saying, was that 2 days before the statute of limitations to file a case, someone leaked the video, a halo camera video from internal investigations. And this was 2 years after everything happened. 2 years after it was hard to find a job. 2 years after, like, I couldn't rent an apartment because I had criminal charges against me for disarming a peace officer, assault on a police officer. You know, finding a way to move forward in my life, because folks didn't believe that I had been jailed. Folks didn't believe that I had gotten assaulted by the police. Folks didn't believe any of it. You know, after spending 3 days in jail, people were like, I'm not really sure I believe what you said, right? And I'm a white passing Latina. I mean, I can sit in rooms, I can sit in different, I can sit at different tables without people questioning why I'm there, you know? So I recognize that privilege that I have. I do recognize that for sure. And I do know that had I been a Black woman in this situation, things could have been completely different. You know, things could have turned out very different. It's hard to talk about this. It's hard to go back and think about what happened.
What about the intimidation that you were feeling? So here you are, you're in the back of a cop car. You've just been maced, so that residue is still in the air, so it's hurting your lungs, it's hurting your eyes. And from your knowledge, you're like, also, I didn't do anything wrong. Yeah. All I said was, don't hurt my friend.
I didn't do anything wrong. The women who were pulled into the situation had absolutely nothing to do with what happened. You know, and the intimidation that they were, oh yeah, no one's going to believe you. No one's going to believe you. There's 12 of us here. After the video came out, and folks were calling me up asking what happened, after I had already said, you know, this is what happened, this is what went down, this is how this happened.
Not to interrupt you, but can you say where you can also find the video?
Yes, yeah, it's on YouTube for sure. It's part of the Denver Diner, 2009 Denver Diner case. Okay. Same time around when Alex was assaulted, 6 months after, actually. The intimidation didn't come for me until I was in depositions. So at that time in my life, I was dancing at Shotgun Willie's. I was dancing at different clubs in Denver. And, you know, my sexual orientation came into question at that time. My sexual orientation, how I identified, you know, during the deposition, I was asked things like, how do you and your girlfriend have sex? Like things that absolutely had nothing to do with the case, right? Things that had nothing to do with, and you know, and my response to that was like, I'm a woman, regardless of what I was doing at the time. time. So, you know, that brings up another point about what Alex was saying in regards to people who are assaulted. Like, there's this narrative that's created around, oh, but he deserved it. Oh, but she deserved it. You know, she deserved it because she was not in corporate America, right? Like, I wasn't involved in corporate America at that time. I wasn't what people deem successful. I wasn't in certain class. In a certain class, I wasn't, you know, that person. So there has to be a reason why these police officers did this to her. That there has to be a reason why police officers did this to Alex, right? There's reason. That's when the intimidation really came to me or affected me, was during the depositions, and things that had absolutely nothing to do with the case were brought up about my life, about, you know, we see videos of Ahmaud Arbery. I saw this video of him, and it's really hard to just think about it. This video was brought up because a prior arrest or a prior interaction with police officers that didn't result in an arrest. I'm not sure if anyone's seen that, but he's in his car enjoying a day off, and he's talking about how he works 6 hours, six days a week, and only has 1 day off, you know? And that, for me, is like, what is the point of that?
Yeah.
The video of Ahmaud Arbery is clearly, you know, and they're not, and even in that situation, there are police ties, there are ties to people within a police department, there are ties to law enforcement,
and that's that protection,
right?
right?
A protection, that brotherhood, that,
Yeah.
yeah. So
one thing I really heard you say is that the intimidation, being a woman, and also, do you feel like, you said also in regards to Alex, that there has to be a reason?
Right.
Why do they feel like they can treat certain people this way and other people another way? And I would like to bring Alex back on and us all three discuss this. So the question is, why? Anna mentioned that there has to be a reason why some people are targeted, or are they targeted, versus other people aren't.
Yeah, I definitely think some people are targeted and some people aren't, especially by law enforcement. My case was initially said to have been all over allegations of an illegal left turn, which was proven to be false, which really says that you officers policing up and down Colfax all day in this district for however many years you've been a District 6 officer, career span, 20 plus years in some cases, you telling me you knew there wasn't a no left turn signal there. So what you're really saying is you pulled me over because I am a young black man driving an 84 Lincoln Town car, and it's a little after midnight, or it's close to midnight. And that profile for you, as the racist that you are, means, I don't know necessarily in his mind if it was, I'm sure I can find a gun in this car, I can find dope in this car, but whatever it is, even if there's nothing, I want to harass this person because now we're talking about an aroma of marijuana coming from within the car, and now I need to get out of the vehicle. And these are the things, just these what is the word that I'm looking for? These precursors to getting you out of the car, to avoiding your civil rights that are not utilized in predominantly white communities unless it's a lower income community. But if I go into Douglas County, and I spent some time there, or if I drive through my old community in the mountains now, I have a higher likelihood of being pulled over because I am a black man. And these officers either want to harass me because they think a specific way about black people, or they feel intimidated to the point where they just want to exercise their authority and show me who is boss in this town.
I 100% agree with that. Something that came to mind while you were saying that is, I grew up in Five Points neighborhood, Curtis Park neighborhood, and I can remember several times as a young girl in high school, getting pulled over in front of my grandmother's house on the block where I grew up because my cousin was driving, and the cop just decided that he wanted to pull us over because he looked like a suspect that I just got a call for. How true is that ever, right? Like, goes to the point of people who don't look like us policing us, people who don't come from our backgrounds policing us, policing or protecting, you know, thinking about the folks who become cops to exert that authority because of the way they were raised, right? Like, talking a little bit about earlier before off camera, we were talking about that generational trauma, that generational inherited, you know, beliefs. Babies recognize what racism is at 6 months old, right? Babies understand things very, very early on in their lives. I was just seeing pictures of young people, especially. This is something trending on social media. This George Floyd challenge, right? Like, who taught this baby this?
I haven't seen that.
Oh my God.
Okay.
It's young people. It's a lot of young people kneeling on friends, on animals, and things like that, and
Blasting it all over social
blasting it on social media. And it's very disturbing, right? Like, who is teaching this to these babies? Because babies inherit. Babies learn what we teach them, the love that we give them, the hate that we give them, whatever it is that we give them, they take that, and then
And once again, taking that and desensitizing.
desensitize.
Because that's what it does. It's like, then it's like, oh, this is a joke. This isn't very serious.
It's not
Oh,
serious
this
at
is this is that, and that's what needs to be addressed in households.
Mhm.
That's what needs to be addressed with the individual character. That is what needs to be addressed globally. That is what needs to be addressed of what we are putting out to the media, like you were saying earlier, Alex. That needs to be addressed nationwide.
Nationwide.
And you know, you brought an interesting point up. Actually, both of you did. So my very first interaction with racism that I can remember happened when I was roughly about 4 years old at a park. And I got to an altercation with some other kid, and he ran up to me and said, and he was about my age, you know, 4, maybe 5 years old, said, not all white kids like to play with black kids. And so that knowing, like, something being passed on in the home that says this person is dangerous, not to be played with, for whatever sort of reason, obviously, like you both have highlighted, is extremely generational, and in departments too. So, for example, there was an officer who was involved in my case and one of the other cases that occurred shortly after mine, who was a 15-year corporal and brought on someone, Devin Sparks. Randy Murr was his trainer, and within 6 months of him being a Denver police officer, he's working at Boondocks prior to that, was involved in a high-profile case for brutality and fired. But this is the issue. He had a dangerous supervisor who proved to him that engaging in these violence is okay. And this officer was actually, both officers were reinstated, and they're both out here on the police, on the force, on the streets policing right now. But this is the reminder to them culturally that, yes, this is okay. And this is how if we don't take these types of violence, these types of remarks, racist remarks, stereotypical remarks, prejudiced jokes, if we make light of
Bullying.
Exactly. Making light of heavy situations, all that does, this is where the desensitization comes into play, where people's response should be heavy, and instead they're making fun of it. And these are young kids who obviously don't know the depths of structural racism, but for some reason, through the media's perpetuation of this being okay, or something that's not to be taken seriously, now they're out here doing very dangerous things.
Coming back to that, doing dangerous things, let's talk about what can be done to heal, right? Like, to bring awareness. So it starts in the womb. It's generational pain. It's passed down generation to generation to generation. Beliefs form. Also stereotypes form. Those stereotypes go into the worldview, and then now you have a stereotype that you're holding on to and also operating and hanging out with your friends or whatever social dynamics that we live in. And now that's being led into that kind of community, and so on and so on and so on. And this can be traced back. And that how do we as people united move forward and teach and learn and educate and become more aware and more responsive to also give you a message of healing and not more pain and ideals and going off of stereotypes and things like that. How do you feel about that? How do we do it?
Personally, I feel a responsibility as a woman, as a light-skinned Latina, a white-presenting Latina. I have the duty to stop those types of things, right? Like, or to do the work myself and really examine what my personal beliefs are, how I respond to certain things, you know, and certain conversations in certain circles. Like I said, I've been invited to sit at tables that a lot of people, just based on the color of their skin, are not, you know, and people will share jokes that are not ill-intentioned or not, you know, I didn't mean to say that in front of you, or they almost forget that I'm a Latina because of the way I look, right? Because I don't speak Spanish 100% of the time. So they feel this very
Comfortability on those?
comfortability, and also, yeah, a comfortability, but what's the word I'm looking for? Almost like if I was a brown Latina, they would just hide it, right? So I feel like I'm very privileged in being able to see the way people act when someone who is like white presenting is in the room, right? Like it's like that scenario of being Latina who speaks Spanish but no one knows you speak Spanish, and being in the room. And this happens a lot in the Latin community where they'll whisper things about you in Spanish and they don't understand that you speak Spanish, right? So it's like I almost speak a different language because I am a Latina, a white presenting Latina. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
People feel comfortable being racist, being openly racist. I can think of a time when I was at a convention and, you know, people are drinking, people are having fun. This is in a predominantly white environment, predominantly white, especially in this specific situation. And people are, is it okay if I say kind of a racist joke? No, it's not okay if you kind of say a racist joke. You know, and I think that's my responsibility as someone who is able to be in these situations, to stop and to examine how much I'm accepting as a person. What is it that I'm accepting from my family? What does like race look like within my own family? What do the conversations around race look like in my own family? Because again, it starts in your home. It starts in your home. And I'm lucky enough that both of my parents are extremely loving. Both of my parents are extremely open to having conversations around whatever it is that we want to have conversations around, my siblings and I. Or my mom is very understanding. She's a teacher, so she understands how young people's minds work, how the stages of development. So I'm very blessed in that way, but not everybody is. You know, not everybody has that nurturing sense. So it's my responsibility to continue operating from a love ethic, right? To continue operating from that, and to continue being able to hold people accountable, or at least bring their bias to their attention, right? Like, if I'm gonna pull you aside, it's my personal responsibility to pull you aside and say, hey, listen, like, that's not okay. It's hurtful. You're perpetuating an idea about someone that 100% probably isn't true, right? Like, it's not true. And how can you examine in this instance of people telling jokes, like racist jokes or kind of racist jokes? Like, I always want to know how you learn that. Like,
do you ever feel, and this is for both of you, do you ever feel like from being in situations where people are joking around on very serious matters and having the experiences that you both have had, with that, it just seems like it's like, do you ever feel like maybe also part of the solution is educating them? So also saying, like you said, like addressing beliefs and things like that, but then also educating why that is offensive. And so now people are having more awareness to themselves, because I mean, we are people that don't really walk around with awareness of why we're doing the things we do. Instead, we're very like ape-like or animal pack-like. Yeah, and since you don't have like, a lot of people don't have the awareness that they're doing that, they do these things and they stand by injustices. They do these things that just don't make actual sense.
You know, what's interesting to that is the fact that, you know, the responsibility to where this can really have a lot of impact is, you know, Anna, you hit the nail on the head. You know, is it okay if I tell this kind of racist joke? The white people in that room need to call out other white people for saying that kind of shit, because they think that it's an appropriate dialogue to have amongst white culture. And I know my parents are white, and I have white friends grown up around white people. I know not all white people. If we look downtown, right now in downtown Denver, the people who have been setting it off for the past 7 days, a lot of those folks are white. People who are out rioting in many other communities around the country, protesting, some even vandalizing things. A lot of these folks are white, you know. And so at the end of the day, white people need to take notes from individuals of color around what they can do, what we would recommend, because we have been doing these things for generations on generations. And at some point, it needs to not fall on our shoulders as our responsibility to continuously educate our oppressors. The people who are in the group of the oppressed need to talk to the people who unfortunately identify with them, because people are simple and surface-minded most of the time, and they just lump cultures and looks and things together to have these dialogues, because it'll be much more powerful in their circle if it comes from someone who looks like them than if it comes from someone who looks like me.
Who they feel like they identify with. And I think that's also a really powerful thing, is identifying with, right? We have to look, I think, as a whole nation of what we're identifying with. And then what does that identification do to point us into the future and actual real change, personally, in our families, all of it. Also, when it comes to, and I think that's a good point that you made, like the supervisors, people that are being hired in organizations, making sure that they're doing the right evaluations, that they're doing the right follow-ups with victims, that they're really tracking the statistics that are happening. And that brings me to another point. I mean, there have been statistics since 2018 that the rise of racism was going up. And that's statistically, I mean, you can look, we'll put a link below so you guys can check out the statistics yourself from the FBI. And that being said, so it's already been reported that there was this escalation, and then boom, and nothing.
I mean, just recently, it took how many years for us to finally realize domestic white hate groups are, like, these are terrorists, and they are out here premeditatedly killing people of color, and they are recruiting followers through social media platforms left and right. Many times these individuals fall in positions of law enforcement. Not necessarily, I'm not sitting here saying that all cops are white supremacists and structural racists. I honestly do believe that some officers join the department to try and do things differently. But when we see officers who are killing or assaulting community members, and you stand around and do nothing, that is complacency. And that, if I were to be involved with something like that, if I was around when someone was murdered, I would be an accessory to that case. And what you're sitting here doing is you're not upholding the law. If your partner is breaking the law, the best thing you could do in that situation is save this man's life. However, you have to do that.
Law, right?
Yes, and arrest your colleague and put his ass on and let the DA figure it out. Let the DA figure it out. But that's the thing, like you had highlighted, this code of silence. Yeah, that's real. Our union here in Denver, whose president is Nick Rogers. He's unterm limited. He's been the president of the union for I don't even know how many years. And he's more powerful, significantly more powerful than the police chief. And so these are some of the underbelly inner workings when we talk about supremacy, white supremacy. Yes, some of these officers may join the force with great intentions, but it is so deep-seated in structural racism since its inception that oftentimes people who join with good intentions are just accepted to becoming products of a corrupted environment. It's not corrupted. It's been doing the same. It was intended to function this way. And it's not broken. It's actually well-oiled and lubricated and doing just fine. But that's the thing. This is an oppressive system. It's never been anything but that, especially for people who look like us. And that's unfortunate for people who go in with good intentions. But I mean, you know, you're like a minnow up against a great white. You're gonna get eaten alive most of the time. But I would encourage any officer to go ahead and take a stand, just like community members do all the time.
And it's not easy to take those stands because the fear that can potentially trail from doing that.
And the intimidation from within, right? Like if they have the power to intimidate us as civilians, I saw this in the face of the officer. I don't know his name. The officer in George Floyd's case, the Asian man.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else kind of picked up on this, but in the video, you can see almost the fear in his face, like the moment that he realizes that he's going to be part of this, right? Like he's gonna be a part of this, or he's already involved in it so deeply that what do I do? Like, you know, fight or flight response kicks in at that moment, and being involved so deeply in an organization that, yeah, maybe he joined the force so that he could do something better. Maybe he joined the force so that he could change how people view, and I don't know anything about this officer, I'm just making assumptions on like what I saw, what I perceived. Maybe he is, you know, trying to do all of these things and create this systemic change. Maybe he's not. But that intimidation is deep, it runs deep, and it's because of folks that, like the union president, allow these types of things to continuously happen and over and over and over again, right? So it makes people afraid. It makes those good cops afraid to speak up. It makes these good cops afraid to, like, I feel like these officers, these three officers have the physical power, one, they have the backing. Yeah, exactly. All he had to do was push his homeboy off of that dude's neck, right? Like off of George, his neck, like he's on his neck. He could have just pushed his knee over and said, in a cop car. Yep, in a cop car, right? So it's a lot.
And then there are some officers, I believe, who are on the force to do malicious shit.
Exactly.
And they just are. And they're there. Beating those tests is not that hard. We all know that. And, you know, coming from the place of where the inception of law enforcement came from, I mean, there hasn't been a period where you've had a force that doesn't have people like this in it. It's
But it's
just
also
impossible.
performance, right? Because I mean, like every time there's any types of situation that happens with community members and they report it, that is a report. So then that is something that can be looked at, right? Or it's supposed to be looked at. Well, yeah.
Interestingly enough, what came out of actually Anna's case, because Anna and I were assaulted by the same officer.
Okay.
So in Denver, Ricky Nixon, he's got a long trail of bullshit. But my case was so mishandled that this officer was allowed to continue to police, where he then assaulted 5 women fully uniformed, strapped up, off duty, and was still given the protection from his union and the Denver district attorney at the time. But what's crazy about the whole situation is this officer was recently reinstated and is back out here on the streets now. And people want to talk about documentation. One of the major things that came out of Anna's case, the Denver Diner case in general, was we figured out officers who were under investigation for patterns and practices of misconduct were being stationed at desks in internal affairs. And then, of course, well, obviously this has also been a crazy pattern and practice, not just amongst Denver, but departments around the country for so long. But the abuse, the cognitive dehumanization, the intimidation that occurs that doesn't get tracked. I mean, they're trying to do things now where they're, you know, trying to figure out how do we track racial data. Well, we hadn't been tracking it. Of course, you hadn't been tracking it because then you couldn't be sued for the disparities that the data would show. But so now they're doing those kinds of things. But what is not being recorded is the amount of times Black people get pulled over for doing nothing, being pulled over, yanked out of the car, harassed, handcuffed, said, you know, the officer's going to say whatever they're going to say and then let go. You know, no, you weren't jailed, you weren't cited, but you were demasculated on the corner. You were dehumanized. You were treated like an animal. And this officer just wants to exercise superiority over you, to remind you And there are some individuals out there who join the force just to do those things, and police in Black, Brown, Latino, Indigenous neighborhoods, lower-income white communities, any cultural diverse community of poverty, just to do things like that.
So it's deep-seated, right? I heard someone today over at the city council meeting say that the police were actually, the reason a police station, police officers exist is to protect property and protect people in slavery, right? During slavery, and again, that's generational, right? So when something was created, it's like you said, it's a well-oiled machine. It's a well-oiled machine. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. So how?
It's like a business. Yeah.
So what are the steps we take to make sure that?
I would like to encourage people right now, especially if you're out protesting, to be very safe. Be very safe. Be cognizant of who you're demonstrating with. Find a local organization if this is your first time demonstrating, cool, because this is an emotional time. I would encourage you to do things from a place of logic. And when the dust begins to settle, I want people to think about, where do we go from here? What are some policy changes? What are some procedural things that can take place? This is an election year. Colorado has 22, soon to have 23 judicial districts in the entire state, and almost every single one of those judicial districts is up for election in reference to the district attorney's seat. So people should stay tuned to following the local candidates who are running in office, because the 2.5 million people in prison, everyone with a criminal background in the United States, were all prosecuted by district attorneys and officers who were allowed to engage in these types of violent affairs in our communities are oftentimes just given the impunity because of who is sitting in the DA's office. So education is key. Finding out these pressure points. Anna and I are always available for anything in relation to helping the community agenda advance in a positive direction. And we have colleagues out of state who are doing the same thing. So learning from each other, I think, is a big part of this process too. But we are in a ripe moment to structurally make some significant changes if we apply pressure in the right directions.
Our primaries are the 30th of the month, so make sure you vote, make sure you get out there. If you don't have resources, if you don't know how to vote, if you don't know who is running for office here locally, please reach out and I can connect folks with resources as well.
Yeah, and I mean, and you're also created an organization that helps people who have been hurt by all the injustices of this really impedes on people's lives. So do you want to say a little bit about that?
So I'm one of the co-founders of the Denver Justice Project. We have been going through some revisioning in the past couple of months, and with the hot topics in the street right now being police accountability overall, ceasing violence in and of itself, not just amongst law enforcement, but amongst community members on community members as well, whether that's black on black, white on black, etc. Denver Justice Project, we have some resources that if you are out protesting, you may want to look at. Our Know Your Rights pamphlet is something you can keep on your person, and it's a guide to basically how to avoid pretextual stops, or how to basically not release your constitutional rights to an officer. There's 5 phrases you can use. First, if an officer pulls you over, you should allow the officer to tell you why they pulled you over. If they stop you and then they come to your window and they ask you, do you know why I pulled you over? Don't tell them why you think they pulled you over. Don't tell them it's because I'm not wearing my seatbelt or I blew that stop sign. Allow them to tell you why they pulled you over. And then after they tell you, you can ask them, am I free to leave? And the answer is only going to be yes or no. Oftentimes it's no. And that'll lead to having your license, registration, and insurance handy. In my case, I like to have it in hand before the officer gets to the vehicle. I keep it in a place in my car that I can reach in, grab it, it's all in one thing, and all of my stuff is right there. So I'm not fumbling around when it gets to the window or when I'm on the side of the road. If I'm stopped at night, I like to stop under a well-lit area or somewhere that is busy with people. A gas station would be ideal. Another thing you can do, and an officer, the pretextual part is when an officer asks you, if they haven't given you probable cause, you have the right to refuse a search. If an officer doesn't say your car smells like weed, or your eyes are red, have you been drinking, things like that. But then they ask you if they can search your car, you can tell them no. And that is your constitutional right. And if you just remain silent and they start to help you out of the car, that is consent. We would never advise you to touch an officer either. Never resist. If an officer wants you out of the car and is putting their hands on you, don't slam your door closed. Comply while saying, I do not consent to this search. It is about preserving yourself to the best possible outcome, because officers will kill you. They will beat you down and they will make shit up about why they did it, and oftentimes get away with it. But what you can do and what you should remember is that the interaction with the police officer is the first step to the bigger criminal justice system. So what's happening right here now, and oftentimes they do have cameras, you never know who's videotaping. Hearing you say, I do not consent to this search is key. And then the fourth thing you can do is you can be quiet at any point in time. We always encourage folks to say less. Less goes a long way when dealing with law enforcement, because they will take your words and use them against you. So until you have representation, if you are jailed, we'd encourage you to talk to no one. And if you are out protesting, or if you are ever just injured in general by law enforcement and jailed, you want to write your narrative down and keep it to yourself as fast as possible, because the brain is moving 1,000,000 miles an hour, and oftentimes you may forget critical things, or you may write something down and then remember something later. Don't share that narrative with anybody who isn't your legal representation, not your cellmate, no police officers, no detectives who come to see you, no internal affairs, none of that. You only give that to your criminal attorney, and then if your criminal case is dismissed, you can move on to civil repercussions, and then you give that to your civil attorney. And the only other thing I would say is and oftentimes the intimidation factor, here it comes again, when you're assaulted by officers, they will oftentimes trump up the charges to things that will equate to years in prison or a substantial amount of time in the county jail. Real life-altering shit. I mean, I can't think of one person who could spend even a handful of days in jail, come out and have their life totally uninterrupted. So what happens is oftentimes, just like they did in my case and Anna's case, is they will charge you with something very serious and give you a plea bargain in court, expect you to take the plea, and that automatically will not allow you to sue the city, because it is some form of admission of guilt. So these are things to keep in mind. I'm not telling you not to take a plea, but I'm just saying before you take a plea, if you ever get in that kind of a situation, you should know what it means on the back end as well.
Yeah. We put links down below. We also are going to flash information if you want to get in charge in my head. If you want to contact Alex or Anna, or if you need a little extra support, any information, or if you would like to understand your rights or the voting or anything like that, there are people here to help and to give knowledge. Because at the end of the day, it's about doing our own internal work. Like Anna was saying, as Alex has said, it's about doing our internal work as well as being able to be advocates for other people, to be able to hold that space for them, because we've done the work to educate. And there's education that needs to be happening on many levels when it comes to this subject matter. And we could probably talk about this on many different angles and levels, probably on very long weeks.
Yes.
Yeah, years, because that's exactly what this is. This is exactly what it is. Years of working. Yeah.
And every single narrative is important in generations upon generations. That's exactly
On that note, narratives are important. So there is a state council meeting at 5 o'clock on Monday. City and county building. If you're able to join, if you want to share a narrative, or if you want to make sure that your voice is heard, or just support folks who are having their voices heard, I encourage you to show up, get in touch with your council member, district council member, and a big shout out to Candy City Walker for inviting you to that. And so, yeah, thank you for that.
5 p.m. on 450. On 450.
Yes.
Yep.
And I also wanted to say that this is a perfect example of it doesn't have to end in death. You can, I mean, both of these two people had undergone tremendous trauma, pain, PTSD, brain injuries, identity, like all the massive amount of healing and understanding that goes through a situation like this. is pretty massive. So we want people to be safe, be educated, understand their rights, understand their viewpoints, understand how they are operating even in these protests that are happening nationwide to an issue. Globally, sorry. Yeah, globally. Yeah, anything else?
Just remember that there are levels. You don't have to be on the front lines protesting. There are people who are willing and are able to sacrifice, or their time, even their bodies. People are getting shot. There are tactics being used right now that are war tactics. So I understand that not everybody has physical ability to be there, but there are levels of supporting this cause.
Many levels.
Donating, voting, educating your family members, educating yourself first and foremost. So just remember that if you're looking for a way to be involved and to make a positive change, there are several levels that you can do that.
Yeah. So I mean, and so many levels just in the whole, the big world of like racism and identity that you guys can get involved with. I mean, just the LGBT community, people that are gay. I mean, it's
intersectional, and there's levels of like immigration and things like that. So it's just,
we could go on. We can go on like all the stuff that happens. So, but I want to thank both of you. Yes, Alex?
I would just say, whatever you do, stop. Just don't turn a blind eye.
Yeah.
Even if it's nothing more than after you do hear your next racist joke, taking that person aside and checking them about this shit. That can be a step one. And as you do these uncomfortable things, they'll get more comfortable, so you can keep doing bigger uncomfortable things.
That one last thing quickly. The increase in racism, I think, is because people started to feel uncomfortable. So their natural whatever they were feeling in those moments came off, right? So like what I equate the rise in racism to is that people Sundays were disrupted when Colin Kaepernick started kneeling, and people's comfortability with seeing like this black body kneeling, this black body projecting exactly what was happening. That their Sunday was so disruptive, right? Don't bother people's football. Don't bring politics into these things. So I think that has a huge impact on how people are identifying their feelings with racism, and that's really uncomfortable, right? It's super uncomfortable. So I think that
but something that needs to be talked about.
Needs to be talked
and
about.
I think that also every family has racism.
Yeah.
And it's not something that we should just be like, it's something to talk about, those feelings. Because a lot of times, even in home dynamics, they're not talked about.
It is dinner conversation.
Yeah.
Dinner table conversation.
Yeah. It is very much dinner table conversation.
Yeah. There's wine, here's so let's fucking start to pour some apple juice. Like, I don't know.
That's cool.
Whatever.
But thank you, Amber.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Once again, I'm Amber B. Shells with Love Love Be Your Beam, and we are a connected wellness community where we bring people together from all over the world talking about serious matters. And I also have an app coming out to help people really understand their own harmony inside so they can address some of these issues, like their belief systems. So they can address some of these issues, identity and where they stand in the world, to really find your voice, your purpose. And we'll continue bringing on people that are leaders in the community to help people move forward. Thank you. Thank you for yours. Yeah, thank you for yours. So we're going to keep recording, but the broadcast is over. So just if you guys want to stick around, cool. But we're just going to keep kind of talking. we have a further conversation basically about what can be done. Or
Exactly.
what kind of
Exactly.
awareness that can be had.
Exactly. Well, and what city council can do things, and we're gonna put them to work.
Yeah, I think
We're gonna put them to work.
No,
And
I was
that was
worried
dope.
about you. I was worried. I was like,
I've been going down
you
there.
sent me that video that you
Oh,
had
I know.
out there.
Of course, the
So,
dagger
of
there
course
it
he
popped
is.
off at like fucking.
Yeah.
I don't even know what time it was, but then I've been going down there. So I went down there 2 nights ago at like midnight, and I was down there for a couple of hours, and it looks like they've been tear gassing folks, and I didn't have any problems, you know, because I brought all my shit, but it was all in my pockets. So let me just try something. I was walking through the police, but I wasn't visibly a protester. They just left me alone. I was driving through their arrest. They're running up through like in front of my truck and shit, and I'm just cruising by, throwing them a nod. But I wanted to just see, like,
What was
the
going on?
curfew is bullshit.
I'm like,
They're
I
only
live right
enforcing
downtown,
it if
so.
you look like you're gonna be doing some shit.
Well, yo, I
Is that
had
your
a
experience,
friend.
or?
Yeah, Amanda lives downtown.
I live
so yeah,
like
it
4
was
blocks from the Capitol.
experience.
So, I mean, it's there. You can't really see a lot, but you could hear, you know, like them blasting off the rubber bullets
Yeah.
or the fireworks going off or people yelling and then helicopters just flying around like all night till 3 in the morning, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's people walking around everywhere and
It
there's a
doesn't look like it's
curfew,
a
but
law
nobody's
enforcement.
really, the whole point is like to keep people, you know, not being down there rioting.
Which in and of itself is a straight infringement on the First Amendment, not because of the pandemic, but because it is out of fear, social control. That's a very slippery slope.
Yeah.
And so what will like we're gonna now have the ability to exercise curfew anytime demonstrations get too big. Like, is
Oh,
is
that's
what
an
we're
issue.
hearing?
Yeah.
Is that what we're hearing? It's okay to
Yeah, bringing in the
infringe on
National
the First
Guard,
Amendment
I mean,
once in
taking
a
it to
while.
that next level.
Police from Aurora, from
Adams County, yeah.
And that's what I was
That's
saying,
right.
like the whole thing that happened with Penn State that I was mentioning, that, you know, basically the anniversary just happened. Military coming into the university, like people on the university. I mean, that's what you do at a university. You learn and you protest and you find your voice and all these things for your classes. And the military came in and shot them all. Yeah. Just like that.
That's it.
Done.
Ouch, fuck,
Kids,
okay.
people
Yeah.
in school trying to
Yeah.
figure out where they stand in the world and what they want to really make a difference in.
Right.
You know, like.
Right, and what better way to
Like,
stifle
what?
your voice than with violence? And that's exactly why, you know, like.
But why is it always taken there? Why is it always taken to these points of like violence versus having the conversations? And I know that you can't appease everybody. I get it. But I mean, I don't know. I'm like a very much of a person that's all like, how do we find the harmony in this? You know,
I'm
like,
definitely that person.
like how do we find the harmony in this? And it's like crazy to me that, you know, people that kind of have more decision making on a bigger scale, that they're able to really meet with some of those brilliant minds all over the world. And all these so-called brilliant minds can't make a salute. Like, I mean, I get that there's other things that are also at play, and certain things need to be happening, but they also don't. So, I mean, you also have to look at, like, where's the thought process there as well. So, I mean, because, I mean, there's just a lot of also peace leaders that, you know, you have dinner with, that, you know, you go to fundraisers with. I mean, everyone's in the same fundraiser room. All these things. They're all the same fundraiser people, the same families, the same everything.
It's the same money being circulated.
Yeah. So it's like, that's also kind of interesting, you know? And then it's like, whatever, on a surface level, then you pick a side. And you have your dinners, and you're like, oh man, I'm gonna stay here. So it's just all that. What? But yeah, all that's really interesting to me too. I guess hungry?
I want to get a beer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think I would like
Stress?
beer also.
Yeah.
You can.
Amber, that was cool though. That was dope.
That was okay.
Yeah.
I
I don't have the ability to share that more. I would.
Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah, you can put it on our page or whatever.
Oh, I'm going to now. Yeah, in hindsight, I'll definitely moving forward any other broadcasts that y'all do. Let me know.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, no.
I turn on my
Send
notifications
them
for your
out.
podcast, and I think it's super important to be able to, like, the healing of it, you know?
That's my focus as like a person.
Too many people avoid it.